Hello and good evening. Welcome to Latin Libertarians. As always, I'm your host, Martha Bueno, here with Zach Foster, my wonderful co-host over on the opposite coast. How are you, Mr. Foster? How's your night going?
I am doing very well, Ms. Bueno. I'm incredibly excited about the guest we have tonight, although I am equally bummed out about a certain lack of success a couple of days ago, and we're going to talk about that for just a couple of minutes before we bring our guest on. So,
Right.
do you want to say it or should I?
I don't see it as a colossal failure, but I have to say, I'll be the first to say that what I was hoping would happen for Cuba didn't happen. But I think there's something to be gained, Zach. I don't think that we can just take it and say that it was a failure. So what happened? On the 15th of November, Cubans were going to go out and protest their government, their communist government, and that didn't end up happening. What ended up happening was that the Cuban government installed people, communists from their party, in front of people's houses, especially the most prominent people, and they prohibited people from going out and protesting and doing these peaceful protests. So the Cuban government defeated the cause, but I think it did teach us some good things. It taught us that we need more organization. I think people just thought that they were going to go out and protest and everything was going to be fine. We're not playing with toddlers. These people mean business, and they're not going to relinquish control. So I think some good things did come out. What do you think?
Some good will eventually come out of this, I hope. I hope that this was a learning experience. Before every Yorktown, there is a Valley Forge. Before every 1917, there is a 1905 type failure. So the history of revolutionary processes shows us that if this is really a popular movement, which it is, and if the people continue agitating in that direction, which they probably will, that regime will eventually fall. However, I'm just going to come out and say it. The military dictatorship from 62 years ago that the current regime was originally fighting to replace, this regime has already surpassed the last regime in brutality, in violence meted out to civilians, in militarization of parts of the population against the rest of the population. And it's even gotten to this. The Cuban Revolution has gotten to this very dystopian state where the very people, the population at large, the majority of the population that's not part of the Communist Party of Cuba is now counter-revolutionary. So the existence of Cuban society today is the Communist Party cadre versus the Cuban people. And the Communist Party of Cuba has already decided that in this civil war, which they have started, the Cuban people must lose because they are counter-revolutionary. So I said last week that whether Cuba was free or whether it was still not done yet, we would be reporting some losses. And that unfortunately seems to be the case. The actual day of the 15th, we didn't have any casualties per se, but immediately the next morning, the morning of the 16th, a Cuban Libertarian Party member, Miguel Lopez Santos, was on the way to visit some of his brothers at the Cuban Libertarian Party headquarters in Havana in the Arroyo Naranjo neighborhood, and he never showed up there as was expected. His phone is not being answered either, and because the country is still fully militarized, they still have police, they still have soldiers and civilian militia members deployed to every corner. We are assuming that the regime took him, as we have seen the regime has taken a lot of people. So that is a photograph of Miguel making a funny face at a particular Cuban Libertarian Party meeting. We are assuming that he has disappeared. We are assuming he has been disappeared by the regime. Party members have phoned around his neighborhood looking for him. He is nowhere to be found. And right now, the only ones who have freedom of movement are the regime. So we are assuming that he has been disappeared. And as we've said before, the reason why we say these names and put these faces on screen and put this heat on the Cuban government is they don't care about human life. We know they don't care about human life, but they do care about bad press. So if we can create as much bad press as possible about things that they're doing to other libertarians like us, then those folks might have a shot at surviving and not being conveniently killed in a prison riot. So let's keep Miguel Lopez Santos in our prayers. What else is going on? Multiple members of the Cuban Libertarian Party have received police citations. It's not like a ticket here in the United States because there are fines in Cuba, but then there are citations. A citation means that police expect you to go see them at the police station, and that is something that obviously our libertarian brothers down there are very hesitant to respond to because they know from experience you could go to a police citation and then they just decide that you're not leaving. And then a couple of days later, you find yourself in a labor prison somewhere in Mayabeque province. So one of the people who has been cited is Raul Ramirez, who is the Cuban LP leader for Pinal del Rio province, although multiple other members of the Cuban LP have been cited. If our producer could bring up the photo of the soldiers real quick, we just want to give people a visual of what our folks are up against. Cuba is very much an Orwellian country, dystopian 1984 style nightmare. The difference is, and what we're looking at right here, we're looking at soldiers in an army truck on the corner of a civilian neighborhood. All right. Remember in our Declaration of Independence, everybody's mad about a standing army occupying people's homes and occupying civilian neighborhoods. This is something that Cubans are living with. As I was saying, it's a very Orwellian style dystopian society, but in 1984, the state had these endless resources to have cameras everywhere. Cuba is still a poor country, so they don't have cameras everywhere. They just have people everywhere. And because the average salary in that country for blue collar workers is between $30 to $45 a month, for just a few dollars a day, you can pay people to be complicit with the regime. And that works for them because they use communism and state centralized socialism to keep the population poor. So every time the state does something like, oh, if you do this patriotic work, we'll pay you, $5 or whatever the peso equivalent of $5 is. People jump at that, especially people who do not have the hope of being free anymore. So we see people collaborating with that system and collaborating with the system that keeps millions and millions of Cubans on the islands not free. But the Cuban people are getting to a point where they're making decisions, and the Cuban regime is deciding to escalate the violence. So we will continue to report to you everything that's happening with our brothers down in Cuba. Now, for our guest tonight, this gentleman was a former member of the House of Representatives for the Republican Party, got elected with the Tea Party wave, and while he has not joined our party, at least not yet, and his views are not representative of our party's views are not representative of his views. Nonetheless, he's doing us a big favor tonight, coming on this show to be engaged as a former public official with all of us libertarian voters. So everybody, please welcome Joe Walsh. I am looking forward to having a great conversation.
Hey, Zach, Martha, great to be with you all. Thank you.
Thank you so much
Thank
for
you
coming
very
on. We
much,
appreciate
Joe.
you being here.
All right, so let's just get right into the meat and potatoes. Let's go back. Let's take it back a ways. What made you originally fall in love with the Republican Party?
I don't know that I never fell in love with the Republican Party. I had always been a Republican because I generally believe in freedom and limited government. I'm a libertarian at heart. The Republican Party was always, before Trump, closer to my beliefs than the Democratic Party.
Well,
So you
same
said
here.
before
I got a
Trump.
slightly different with
So
you. When
let's
I was
just
a young 18-year-old Constitution nerd, I did fall in love with the values that Republicans were espousing. It was later when my eyes saw that the actions did not back up the words, which is when the wool started to get pulled back over my eyes.
Yeah, and look, again, I generally have always gravitated toward more freedom, less government. On paper, the Republican Party always used to say that's what they believed in. Most of that's bullshit. They believe in maybe a little less government, but not really than the Democratic Party. So, but to Martha's point, Trump just flipped everything on its head. It's a cult now. It's not a party.
So going back to when we were still involved, because a lot of folks have made mistakes in the past. A lot of folks have belonged to something that was not necessarily the best thing in the past. I'm one of those people, which is why I'm actually one of the last ones to judge folks who are honest about it. It's when folks are not honest about it, or when they try lying to backtrack. I'm not particularly proud of my time as a Republican, not because I'm ashamed of what we were fighting for. We were fighting for a lot of very beautiful things. Just in my opinion, in hindsight, not everybody was honest with what we were supposedly fighting about. So while young idealists like myself were fighting for things like balancing the budget and lower taxes for everybody, a lot of the folks who were in charge of the party really were just promoting xenophobia and Islamophobia. And even as a reserve soldier, I just wasn't on board with this stuff. But again, it took a number of years to see this. I am very curious though, because as a young college Republican, I was very heavily involved with campaigns, congressional campaigns, state assembly campaigns. If anybody in Southern California, where I'm from, was running for office as a Republican, I just wanted to be there. The way other 19, 20, 21-year-olds wanted to go to the rave and they wanted to experiment with beer and ecstasy and all this crap, all I wanted to do at that age was talk politics and do campaign stuff. So, Joe Walsh, what is it that really lit a fire in your heart to run for Congress in the first place?
I was pissed off. I got
About
elected in that Tea Party wave in 2010. I still consider myself to be a proud Tea Partier. Like most of the Republicans who were elected in 2010, I was pissed off about the size of government and all of the debt. So we went to Washington to do something about all of the debt. And I found out in about one afternoon that the Republican Party didn't give a damn about the debt. So it became pretty clear pretty early on that I was elected with a number of guys like Justin Amash and a number of other good guys, and we all became pretty disillusioned pretty quickly with the Republican Party.
Was there a particular meeting,
How does that work?
session where you go ahead, Martha?
Go ahead, Martha.
No, I was just going to say the same thing you were, Zach. How does that work when you show up? How you said in one afternoon you found out that they didn't give a damn. So tell us, how does that happen? What happened to give you that impression?
Well, Martha, and I'm an old guy, and so I didn't go to Washington when I was in my 20s or 30s. I went there to get some shit done. And most people who go to Congress, they're younger and their eyes are like wide open and they're caught up with all the lobbyists and they're wined and dined. I went there and right away I said to my Republicans, government's too big. We've got all of this debt. I want to introduce a piece of legislation to balance the budget, a balanced budget amendment, Zach, as you said. And I was laughed at early on, like in a day, by most of my fellow Republicans. It became clear to me that they had no interest in cutting spending at all.
Wow.
Dang.
And that's the big thing that I hear most from Republicans is that Republicans want a smaller government and they want less taxes and they want these things. So how do the Republicans keep that narrative going while not delivering? I mean, they're great salespeople for sure.
Well, I don't think I don't even think they try to push that anymore. Trump was a huge spender. Trump didn't give a damn about the debt. When I was in Congress and Obama was president, me and Jim Jordan and Justin Amash, all of us, we screamed almost every day about the debt. As soon as Trump got elected and he increased the debt a hell of a lot faster than Obama did, no Republican said anything. You can blame the politicians, blame the Republicans, but remember, I got elected by people back home, Tea Party people who were concerned about the debt. They didn't care about the debt either when there was a Republican president. So it wasn't just the politicians. Republican voters clearly cared less about that issue as well.
That just seems so incredible that as somebody who was campaigning, I mean, I'm assuming when you were campaigning, you were talking to people, you were shaking hands, people were communicating to you things that were supposedly keeping them up at night. So Really, what do you think it was about? There's a Republican in office now, therefore none of this matters. Where do you think the cognitive disconnect comes from, and the source of outrage that they're outraged when a Democrat is raising the debt but not a Republican?
Well, two things. We're all very stupidly tribal now. And so we never criticize anybody on our team. Both sides do that. The second thing is, the Tea Party sent me to Congress. A lot of people don't understand the Tea Party movement. The Tea Party movement was concerned about the debt, the bankrupting of future generations. That was real. That's what got me elected. But there was also an uglier element to the Tea Party, more of the nationalist kind of build a wall around the country kind of thing. Once we went to Washington and it became clear that we weren't going to do a damn thing about the debt, then I think a lot of the Tea Party folks back home became really disenchanted. And then, not that much longer, a demagogue like Trump came along in 2016, and he tapped into that uglier nationalist side of the Tea Party movement. And then the deal was sealed. That's all they care about.
I think there's a lot of value in what you're saying right there, and a lot of parallels in my understanding of the evolution or the devolution of the Tea Party movement. As a matter of fact, as libertarians and former students of Ron Paul per se, because folks like Ron Paul and Amash don't just have their beliefs, but they have a specific ideology with kind of a laundry list of great thinkers and economists and whatnot. So the original Tea Party, which was actually launched on the anniversary of the Boston Tea Party in 2007, the top two concerns were the endless warfare state. Why are we expending so much blood and treasure in the Middle East? It's not making us safer, and also just all this debt that we're getting in. Before we know it, all of our kids are going to owe something like $1 million each in debt, and then all the different countries of the world are going to want to invade us because we can't make good on it. And then we saw between 2007 and 2012, the Tea Party seemed to morph into what you said, this weird nationalistic, we're going to complain about the debt, but when we're complaining about the debt, it's really, welfare for illegal aliens and stuff like that. The uglier side of things that motivate people. So I do appreciate what you're saying there. When did you personally become disillusioned with the whole machine, or the team that was supposedly backing you?
I never really became disillusioned because I wasn't a young punk. I saw it up close and personal. I pretty much knew what I was getting into. It saddened me. These people who elected me no longer really cared about the debt. That saddened me. I've been a Republican my whole life. The Republicans in Washington made clear that they didn't care about it. That saddened me. And so then I realized after I was in Congress that the folks back home cared a lot more about these cultural issues. And again, let's be real with what the Republican Party is. The Republican Party is mainly old white men and old white women. It's my experience that the Republican Party, these voters, they somehow want to return to like a 1954 America. And we can't go back to that. But Trump sold them a bunch of that. But that's kind of what they want. And the Republican Party's never been truthful with them.
I think there's a lot of truth to that. And you're actually reminding me of something that a gentleman by the name of Kent Sorensen once said. So during that big season of the Tea Party, the big Tea Party wave, so 2010, 2012, Kent Sorensen was a Republican state senator from Iowa, and there ended up being a lot of controversy because first he was the Iowa for Bachman state chair, and then in the middle of the night he flipped and then gave his endorsement to Ron Paul and said, "Hey, sorry, but this guy's actually got a shot of being the nominee, and these are the issues that are really important to the Tea Party. Therefore, rah rah rah, Congressman Paul." And then you find out that certain people from the Ron Paul campaign had bribed Sorensen with $75,000 that they laundered, not very well. And that is when people started going to jail for that about 3 years later. That really pulled the wool over my eyes at how far the rot of Washington had gotten, because this was no longer just the Republican Party in general. Now the rot and the corruption and the Washington money machine had even infected the Ron Paul circles, which to young, small L libertarian, big R Republicans, that was absolutely devastating. But Ken Sorensen is actually the person from that whole episode that I got the most respect for, because he, number one, he did his time. How many people from Washington, how many people do we know were on Epstein Island, for example, in both parties, and they're never going to see a single investigation or jail time in their life? This guy, took money one time, and he paid for it, and he paid a really dear price. But he comes out of it saying that he was a little bit racist, and there were some issues that were being faced by the Black community, the Latino community, and Native Americans, to which he was totally isolated, because in upper middle class white suburbia, ain't no shame in being from that. I was raised in that, and it was a wonderful childhood. But in upper middle class white suburbia, you tend to be isolated in an echo chamber that makes you very blind to problems that are being generally suffered by other people in our society. And it's not the blindness itself that we have a problem with as Hispanics on Latin Libertarians. It's when they double down and deny that anything is wrong because everything is okay here in my neighborhood at the Villages. That's where I depart, and that's where I'm very grateful that nowadays Mr. Sorensen has departed, and you two are recognizing that it is what it is, even as being an older white man. Nobody here is white guilting. It is only certain sectors of certain populations that are not even willing to do it. Those are the folks that we have a problem with. But before I continue to monologue, there's a couple of things I got a question about. In your time as a congressman, who can you say out of all your colleagues, Republican or Democrat, who has integrity? And if you feel comfortable answering the second part, who let you down?
The number that have integrity is a small number. Ron Paul, who I got to know very well, has integrity. Dennis Kucinich, who I served with on the Democratic side, had integrity. Justin Amash, integrity. Raul Labrador from Idaho had integrity. The Colorado governor, Polis, who served in Congress when I was there, another Democrat, had integrity. It's a small list. I mean, most politicians suck, and most of them are there for too damn long. And the longer they're there, the more they suck, and the more out of touch they are with the American people, both Republicans and Democrats. That's typical.
All right. So on the topic of people who suck, you don't necessarily have to name names, but there are certain individuals who, since the July 11th protests in Cuba lit off like fireworks, and obviously that's a very important topic to us Latino libertarians, we have heard certain members of Congress from both parties promising endlessly, we are doing what we can to make sure that the Cuban people have Wi-Fi. Number one, is that ever going to happen in your opinion? Number two, do members of Congress actually have the ability to make that happen beyond just voting money for it? Or are these politicians really playing with the hopes and dreams of immigrants who still have family on that island?
I don't know if it will ever happen. I don't know that Congress has the power to do anything in that regard. It doesn't surprise me that members of Congress are blowing smoke when it comes to an issue like that and getting people's hopes and dreams up. They typically do that kind of a thing.
Gotcha. Now, when did you leave Congress? What were the circumstances?
I got redistricted. So we got elected, and then there was redistricting in 2012. I got drawn into a very Democratic district. So I got redistricted out of my district. And then I went on the radio and had a nationally syndicated radio show all over the country and kept talking about the libertarian free market issues I believed in.
Gotcha. And how long did you have that ready? What was it called? Are there still episodes that people could go back and listen to?
No, it's called the Joe Walsh Show. I was on a couple hundred markets, stations all over the country, and I was doing well. But then Trump came along, and everybody in the conservative media world had to make a decision. Are you going to say what you believe when it comes to Trump, or are you just going to become part of the Trump cult? I couldn't do that, so I said what I believed. So because I opposed Donald Trump, I began to basically lose my radio show.
Gotcha. So what do you believe the Republican Party should be today? And then what do you believe that it actually is? I mean, you've already used a particular four-letter word, but we can go a little bit more into detail with what you think about it.
Look, I think I left the Republican Party about a year ago. I had been a Republican my whole life. I actually, as you know, mounted a Republican primary challenge to Donald Trump back in 2019, 2020. It didn't last very long. I felt some Republican needed to run against Trump. I think the Republican Party is dying. I really do. This 168-year-old duopoly we've had, Democrats and Republicans, I think it's coming to an end. And I think the Republican Party is dying first. I think it's Trump's party. I think Trump's going to run again. And the party has become a very Trumpy party. What does that mean, a Trumpy party? I mean, it's a nationalist party. It's a party that flirts with white supremacism. It's a party of protectionism.
Find people on both sides.
And it's a party that doesn't believe in the truth. And it's a party that embraces authoritarianism. If you're a libertarian, nothing should scare you more than what the Republican Party is today.
I completely agree. Now, real quick, would our producer mind showing those two photographs of something that Congressman Clyde is trying very difficult to deny? So while our producer is putting up those photographs that I would like our audience to see, let's just go straight to it. January 6th, what does Joe Walsh believe happened that day based on facts that he knows?
I sat and watched it live and I cried. It was a physical, violent attempt to overthrow an American election. It was an insurrection, all incited by the first sitting president in American history who refused to accept the will of the people. That's what it was.
So right there, we've got on screen a photograph of Congressman Andrew Clyde helping the Secret Service and Capitol Police barricade the door so that a certain crowd of people cannot get in. And then there is a second photo in which you can see a particular expression on his face I think is priceless. But now that the main photo's been up, that congressman is acting like that never happened. And we've got the photograph where you can see him there barricading the door because he knew that the building was physically under attack. Now, as a libertarian, this puts me in a very, and there he is. He's all, look at his body language, and that's him on the left, while you can see somebody else is using a gun, and he's got the gun pointed at one of the entrances. According to the man in that photograph, that never happened. That was a normal tour group, even though they know that's not true. As a libertarian, I was saying this is putting me in a very difficult position because historically we have celebrated certain types of civil rebellions, especially tax rebellions, anytime that people take to the streets to protest against police brutality. When the Black Panthers stormed the California State Senate in 1968, we did not necessarily think that was a tragedy, although ironically enough, that was the beginning of gun control in California. Republicans under Ronald Reagan had a problem with Black people exercising the Second Amendment. But it's just another example of there's something that modern conservatives say that they believe and then what they're actually practicing. I also watched it live and I had to ask myself, what were their motivations? And some people might think this an irresponsible thing for me to say, but this is so different from, per se, the Bundy Ranch standoff. That was something where the federal government actually went out to somebody's land. They took somebody's land. I don't know what other people's interpretations are of the court cases, but that was something where the feds actually sent an unequal amount of force over to a civilian's property, and then other civilians showed up to save the property, and they did not escalate it beyond where the government escalated it. We libertarians believe very strongly in the non-aggression principle. So something like the Bundy Ranch response, even the Alaska response, where there was not force initiated on other human beings, that was the correct style of action. And that was for a very noble purpose. They were saving somebody's American dream from the feds. That's one of the most American things that anybody can do. Then we've got January 6th. The people who were storming that building were not doing it to lower the debt, to balance the budget, to bring our troops home from all these unwinnable wars, to end the war on drugs at home and abroad so that these communist regimes can no longer make money on drug trafficking and terrorism trying to attack us and all these other problems. They were doing it so that one man could be president forever. This is not the Republican Party that I joined, but even as far back as a decade ago, almost a decade ago when I left the GOP, I could see that this is the road that these people were on. As a matter of fact, I would love to talk to you, Joe, about your thoughts on QAnon, because before QAnon, these were the people who they didn't really have a name. A lot of them were doing the 9/11 truth thing, which I'm not even going to get into that, but a lot of them called themselves part of Alex Jones's army, or like the anti-Bilderberg squad or the anti-George Soros squad. Then Q happened. Please tell us, what is your interpretation of the Q movement and ideology, if any?
Look, I got to be honest. When I hear Q and QAnon over the years, I generally don't even pay attention. Here's what I know. There are people on the right who are very susceptible to conspiracies. There are people on the left susceptible to conspiracies as well, but we see more of it on the right. And Trump is aware of this, and Trump fed those beliefs toward conspiracies. I mean, the entire base of the Republican Party right now is pretty damn radicalized. They don't believe in basic truths, and they don't believe in democracy. This is the bigger, broader point that should scare all of us.
Absolutely. Although I do think it interesting that how people would still be susceptible to this propaganda despite the broken promises. This is something that goes way beyond, for example, does God exist? Has Bible prophecies been fulfilled? No. They told us very specifically he was going to get sworn in again on January. Then it was going to happen in March. Then it was going to happen in June, then September, then October. And then they keep pushing it back and pushing it back. And you know what? I don't think JFK came back from the dead either at the Q event in Dallas, like supposedly that guy was supposed to do. Although something really interesting, I saw two photographs. There was apparently a side event during the Q convention in Dallas at the grassy knoll where JFK was shot, where there was going to be some revelation. I still don't know what the revelation was, but I saw two photographs of a man with a bird on his shoulder standing under an overpass and a line of people being briefed one by one by the Birdman. Now I have to know. I am dying to know who was the Birdman and what were his instructions for the Q people, and how do they continue resolving this shenanigans? Because I understand folks with mental health issues might be very susceptible to that because it's really easy to mess with people's perceptions on reality. But at a certain point, where does mental health issues end and it just starts becoming groupthink like the Third Reich? Where does it end?
Yeah, and the other thing, Zach, is there's a real authoritarian impulse on the right. The impulse on the left is towards socialism and communism, But the impulse on the right is the embrace of a king, the embrace of a dictator, the embrace of a cult leader. And you then believe everything the dictator says. You echo everything the dictator says. That's what we have right now in the Republican Party. So I think they're susceptible to all these conspiracies because you've got the dictator out there pushing them.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And there's a lot of folks in the media who are pushing that. I make no bones about it. I vehemently disagree with most of the content that Tucker Carlson is churning out these days. Again, being a Latino, I am all for the advancement of all the demographics in the United States, whether the mainland or territories. We are all brothers. We are all children of the same God. That said, I'm not going to pretend that I didn't see Tucker interviewing the vice mayor of Uvalde, Texas, who said, you know, I haven't been able to confirm this, but I've heard rumors that the illegals are getting debit cards with $1,400. And then Tucker says, why don't we have a real insurrection? Which there's two things going on. Number one, that is implying that what they tried to do in January so that Trump could be king, president forever, so that Trump could be king, that never happened. But number two, if you do the real insurrection, really, like Latinos getting some public benefits in an already large welfare state, that's what's going to make you start the Civil War? Come on, bro. That if I had known that the Republican Party was going to have those people when I joined as an 18-year-old Republican, I never would have signed up, because that ain't the good old conservatism that I was reading about in Political Science 101. That ain't what Ron Paul and Rand Paul, before he went down the Trump cult road, were preaching when they were new. I'm very glad, though, to hear what you said, that Ron Paul did have integrity.
Ron Paul did.
Yeah.
His son, Rand Paul, who I knew quite well, like all the other Republicans, he basically sold his soul.
Yeah, and I used to defend him very vehemently, but the more I saw him make excuses for Trump, that's when I said, all right, I understand, because Rand had often lamented people try to project the image of his father onto him, and that's just not him, which I understood. He was fighting for his individuality, but no, I mean, when he was saying, I'm not libertarian, he really was saying, I am not libertarian. So let's go back to the cost of having integrity. You said that you no longer have this syndicated show on hundreds of programs. I know that you went against the grain, but what actually happened to bring that empire crashing down? When did they turn on you?
The minute I publicly opposed Trump in
Really?
late,
It was Trump. So it was Donald Trump.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Look, I was one of the voices of the Tea Party movement. I was one of the leading conservatives in the country. The minute I opposed Trump, everything changed. And so, again, none of this is surprising. If you oppose Donald Trump as a Republican, you have no future in the party. If you oppose Donald Trump as anybody in the conservative media world, and I was both, you have no future in the conservative media world, which is why most people in the conservative media world become Trump followers, and most Republicans in Congress don't speak out loud against Trump. I couldn't do that. I couldn't live that way.
Well, I definitely respect you for that. Tell me about the experience of primarying him. Was there anybody who was willing to listen?
Now, everybody privately, Zach, cheered me on privately. A lot of my former Republican colleagues in Congress cheered me on privately. But publicly, by then, Trump owned the party. Don't forget, Zach. Look, I probably didn't have a prayer against Trump to begin with, but the minute I got into the race, they began to cancel primaries. I think within about a month, 22 primaries and caucuses around the country were canceled. I mean, that's the leader of the party canceling elections. So it became virtually impossible for me to get any traction.
To keep himself in power. That is, as much as Trump's Republicans love to call Biden supporters and the Democrats communists. It is incredibly offensive to me because you might not know this. I've lectured our audience plenty about it. For close to 5 years now, my partner in crime, Martha, and I have been deeply, deeply involved with political opposition movements in Cuba and Venezuela. We have personally evacuated people out of those countries as conduits in an underground railroad. We know what communism does to people. I don't often like to talk about it, but I have even paid to bury Venezuelan dissidents who did not survive the communist revolution. And the only ones I see, what you said, the Democrats like flirting with socialism and communism. That is absolutely true as far as public policy goes. But the ones in my experience who have been behaving like the communists and using the same power play move as the communists, I'm sorry, but it's the Republicans, specifically Trump's Republicans. And what you just said, canceling elections. Let me tell you something else the GOP did, all right? Everybody was crying about the Democrats stole the election from Trump in Arizona. In 2018, the Libertarian Party of Arizona had a historic candidate, Kevin McCormick, who was not one of these crazy libertarians that a lot of mainstream voters complain about. Kevin was the marketable candidate who just stepped out of a Norman Rockwell painting, and he also raised a historic amount fundraising for a third party gubernatorial candidate in Arizona. What happened? Nobody but Jonathan Laness, the president at the time, the chairman of the Arizona Republicans, sued the McCormick campaign on a false allegation that the majority of the signatures for the candidates to appear on the ballot were false or not valid. The Maricopa secretary, who was a Republican, obviously took his side, and the judge just ruled against the Libertarians. So with one lawsuit, but the same signatures, the Arizona GOP got the entire Libertarian slate kicked off the ballot in the year 2018. And this is the state where the same people are complaining 2 years later that the Democrats stole it. I'm sorry, but again, the only people acting like the communists to stay in power and messing with elections has been the Republicans. It just is what it is.
I've been asked and encouraged to become a Democrat ever since I left the Republican Party. I respect.
Yeah, you can be a libertarian any day you want. Sure.
I respect the Democrats. I'm not because policy matters to me. But the biggest threat, Zach, in this country right now is the attack on democracy. Democrats may be wrong on a lot of policy. They believe in democracy. This Republican Party does not.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, a lot of our more limited government inclined, if not anarchistic viewers are going to be mad. Oh, you're using the word democracy. Guys, we're talking about Republican democracy as outlined in the United States Constitution. And if the feds just stuck with the damn Constitution, we would have the most libertarian government in American history. Personally, while I disagree with having a strong centralized federal government, I have at least taken pride that the United States Army did a lot more than politicians to end slavery in this country. And that's something that I think is a beautiful part of our history. I am deeply disappointed that the party that broke the chains of slavery, because I do believe that states generally have a right to secede. That said, what's their purpose? We're dealing with a rebellion. I don't think it was justified. I'm not going to get too far into that, but it amazes me how the party of Lincoln, the party that broke the chains of African slavery in this country, is now the party that is defending David Duke and that is defending the statues of these enemies of the United States, and they are flying this fictional version of the flag of the rebellion, which was not actually the flag of the rebellion, and they're claiming heritage, not hate. I am so disappointed that this is what the party of Lincoln has become. It was never supposed to be anything like that. What happened to actual conservatism? What happened to the Tea Party? Well, they got rid of their national platform at the 2020 convention. That's what happened. And they replaced it with a statement: "We will do whatever Donald Trump wants."
Yeah.
Well, that is depressing, but let's talk about today. Let's talk about rebuilding empires. what kind of projects do you have today? Where can people listen to you talk after all these radio stations done pulled the plug on you?
So anybody can follow me, Zach, on Twitter at Walsh Freedom, at Walsh Freedom. I launched a new podcast a few weeks ago called White Flag with Joe Walsh. It's me having conversations every week with people who disagree with me, with people who don't think like me, because we're way too fucking tribal right now. We all live in our political silos and nobody's talking across the divide. So I'm primarily doing that right now to try to bring the sides together to talk. It's called White Flag with Joe Walsh. Politically, Zach, I'm homeless. I'm an independent right now. I don't belong anywhere.
Well, that is quite all right because we are more than happy to be the temporary shelter for politically homeless small L libertarians. We are more like a church mission and less like a cult. You can join if you want, but we're definitely not going to chain you. Real quick, I believe a member of Congress published something on social media that, as an American, you found to be personally offensive. Would you like to talk about that real quick?
Which probably a number of things. Which one are you referring to, Zach?
Who is the latest person trying to kill AOC vicariously
Oh,
on
Paul
social media?
Gosar.
So what's the
Oh
story
my
there?
God. I got elected with Gosar. He was part of that class. He's nuts. He's insane. I mean, what did he do? He posted a video of himself killing another member of Congress. He was censured. He should have been censured. He has no business being in Congress. But, look, that's up to the constituents in his district. But
No,
Paul
that's
Gosar is not that
interesting.
different from Donald Trump. They're one and the same.
Yeah, interesting. You mentioned that. I remember. Well, the Republicans are still complaining about Kathy Griffin doing the bit with the severed Donald Trump head, which I also thought was in very poor taste because we should not be fantasizing about killing public officials and doing things that are going to start a civil war, especially having responded on the humanitarian aid side to civil wars in other countries, civil wars who started because 20 years ago, people in those countries were doing the same type of demagoguery that we're seeing today. We're seeing it on both sides, but it really has mostly been the Republicans. I've seen what that leads to, and it is absolutely sickening to
Yep.
me. But
Yep.
it is also relieving that there are people who are willing to just say, hey, it was wrong. It didn't end up the way we wanted it to, but we all got to come together as Americans and course correct. I don't care whether people watching this right now are anarchist libertarians or minarchist libertarians or politically homeless Republicans, whoever you are. We're all American. We all got to live in this country together, and we need to find a way to get
Amen.
along. And traditionally, we have been able to do that with the economy and with civil society, but now with things like the culture wars, the bake the cake wars, the masks and the pizzeria wars, even the economy is getting incredibly politicized. And frankly, I'm sick of it because you know
Well,
I don't care. I don't care about ideology. I care about character. And there are people trying to put a dictator in power right now, and that's incredibly disturbing to me.
yep. But you're
All
young, Zach.
right,
It's going to
so
stay ugly for a while. Thanks, man. It's been good to be
White
with you.
Flag with Joe Walsh on Apple and Spotify. Is that correct? And then
You got it.
Walsh Freedom on Twitter. All right, so everybody, if you do not go to Twitter and follow Walsh Freedom, and if you do not subscribe to White Flag with Joe Walsh, then I don't know, Star Killer Base is going to blow up your planet. Thank you
Hey,
very
Zach,
much,
thank
Joe,
you.
for
It's been
your
great
time
to be with
tonight.
you, man.
Yeah, and anytime you want to come back, you are more than welcome to. And we can definitely we could probably do just a whole episode on member of Congress stories on the Hill. That's for another
Thank you,
time.
Zach. Anytime,
Thank
my
you.
friend.
Outstanding. All right, everybody, go listen to White Flag with Joe Walsh. Thank you very much, everybody. This has been a wonderful edition of Latin Libertarians. Remember, please keep the Cuban Libertarian brothers in your prayers. There's also going to be an election and a fake election in Venezuela in a couple of days. ignore that nonsense because both sides are part of the same regime, and they are interested in keeping communism on those people for the rest of eternity. If you are watching this and you are a politically homeless Republican, contact me. I am on Twitter as Mr_Zach, ZACH_Foster, or you can contact Martha Bueno on Twitter as Bueno for Miami. And just let us know, what is it that you need to see from the Libertarian Party to make us more of a viable party in your eyes when the next election cycle comes around. Everybody, thank you very much for your attention. Joe Walsh, thanks to him for his time. It's good to talk with other Tea Party veterans and disillusioned ex-Republicans about how we might rebuild this beautiful country that was built on some very beautiful libertarian ideals. Everybody, please dig the threads. Don't tread on anyone. That's what we are all about. All right. A huge thank you to our producer, Drew, for doing a fantabulous job tonight. This brings tonight's show to an end. Good evening, and may liberty reign forever.